and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Access Television, the City of Oshkosh, the Oshkosh Cable Television Advisory Commission, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi, and welcome to Eye on Oshkosh. I'm Cheryl Hentz, along with former Oshkosh Mayor and City Councilwoman Melanie Bloechl. On this edition of Eye on Oshkosh, our current guest tonight is the current mayor and president of the Oshkosh Common Council, Stephen Hintz. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be with you today.
Pleasure to have you. Lots of things to talk about when we think of city government.
Yes.
One of the first things that we wanted to mention was, of course, we finally got a stormwater utility, and we got the fee passed about a month or so ago.
Yes.
So thank you very much, Council, for doing that. It's nice to see that the average citizen is not going to be the only ones paying. But on that subject, when can we expect to really see our first bill for this utility? What's the city's timeline?
I think you'll find that on your fourth quarter sewer and water bill. And then after that, it will be on your quarterly bill.
And that always rotates depending on
It
when
does.
you get your bill and what zone you're in and so forth.
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, you could get it in January, February, or March for
Okay.
your first payment.
Sure.
But it will simply be one additional line on your water and wastewater bill.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what is one of the discussions, reasons for all the layovers, and unfortunately you weren't at one of the meetings because you were busy traveling, was the concern for the cost per, it's ERU, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
The
and
equivalent runoff unit,
and
right.
that gets a little confusing for people who haven't really dealt with runoff issues or stormwater and so forth. But the cost per ERU was one of the contentious parts of the stormwater utility and putting this all into place. What is it that people are going to be looking at in that first bill? Let's say a single family homeowner like myself, you know, a little 3-bedroom ranch. What is that bill going to show? I mean, what is the cost going to be for me on that one line item?
I believe it will be about $19 for your first bill, and this would be for a single-family residential bill. Essentially what we have are a whole series of activities that the city pays for stormwater management, and when you add them all up, it comes to about $2.1 million. So there was some dispute and discussion about which particular items should be included in that area. For example, street sweeping, leaf pickup. You know, how much of that should be attributed to stormwater management, and how much of that would occur if it didn't rain at all? And you know, I think those are all legitimate questions.
Sure.
And it probably took a little longer to establish what would be in and what wouldn't be in. In the end, the city really took I think, I don't really want to call it a conservative or a liberal perspective, but it pulled out the cost of leaf pickup altogether from the stormwater utility. And you know, even though, yeah, it does make a difference in terms of stormwater, we can't precisely say what's leaf pickup for other purposes than stormwater, so we'll just pull it out for right now. So I think that a lot of the discussion was simply trying to say what should be in the total amount that we need to finance, and what items are things that are questionable.
This money that you're going to be collecting for the stormwater utility will be used to take care of issues like flooding issues.
Yes.
There was a whole plan that was laid out that needed, the city put forth and directives that really need to be addressed that have been let to languish for many, many years in the city of Oshkosh. Sawyer Creek, Campbell Creek, a lot of the box culverts that we had, and that's pretty unique to our area. I mean, we like to call it historical, I think, is probably what makes us all feel good. But one of the things that just recently came about is the City Council just had an executive session discussing the potential purchase of, I believe it was the 100 block of Murdoch. Was it 100 and 200 block of Murdoch?
Yes.
And I'm wondering if my locations are correct, this is that kind of empty looking lot that sits right in front of the Pick and Save, right on kind of that corner across from the Chalice.
Yes.
That's the piece of property that you were talking about. And I know that this is, we might be in kind of an area where it was executive session material, but is that area has always historically had a lot of flooding issues. Is this going to be part of a stormwater utility purchase to try to take care of some of the flooding? Is that what the purchase is about with the executive session?
Yes.
Oh, hey.
Yes.
Bingo. Ding, ding,
So
ding.
monies from the stormwater utility will be used to purchase that?
Well,
am I understanding that right?
I mean,
or-
I mean, you're correct. This has always been a part of the city where we've had flooding problems there, and so what we really need is a detention pond in that particular area, and so at this point, I don't think I'm really passing on highly strategic secrets.
Well,
there.
it's been talked about for a very long time.
The discussion really was the acquisition of property for a detention pond there. Now, to your question specifically, will this be financed out of the stormwater utility plan? It should be. I mean, it certainly is the intention that all of our costs, operating costs plus the debt and the debt service costs related to stormwater mitigation efforts will be covered by the utility. Obviously, as we are in this transition period, there are some financial things that probably have to be worked out, but certainly that is the intention and the plan there, yes.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
with this retention basin being looked at in this particular location, is it a foregone conclusion that the purchase is going to take place? So indeed, we are looking at a retention pond or basin there?
Well, I think, there are discussions with the property owner, about the property. At this particular point, I can't honestly say where those discussions are. I think the council basically recognized that there was a need for it and an opportunity. Obviously, there always are issues about price, and the city is not going to pay what it thinks is an unreasonable amount of money for any particular property. The owner probably thinks it's always worth more than what the city thinks it's worth.
Is this one of those
Yeah.
situations where it's almost eminent domain? If indeed the property owner and the city can't come to some sort of conclusion as far as, what is fair market price, and when we're looking at quote unquote the best interest of the city being held, could this be a situation of eminent domain where you can actually do a taking of the property for a certain price, even if the seller isn't motivated?
Yeah. Let me answer that in two ways. I think that first, in situations where you have an acute flooding problem and that there really are no reasonable alternatives in terms of a site, for a detention pond or a pumping station or something like that, that it would fall under the eminent domain law. In this particular case, we're just not at that point in discussion, and I think that probably the reason for that is that there may in fact be other alternatives, other sites that would also, you know, alleviate the flooding problem out there. So, I mean, I think that when we were talking about that particular site, it was a good site, and it would work in terms of affecting our problem out there. But, you know, is it the only site? Probably not.
Why now? And I guess my last question with regard to this, because we've got so much stuff that we want to cover with you, because there's not too many chances to get a busy mayor sitting at the table and being very gracious about answering all these questions. But why now to go in and purchase this site where flooding in that area has been, you know, really something that's been going on and on? Certainly not that it shouldn't be addressed, but I guess the reason I'm asking about timing is because the stormwater utility setting that up has taken such a long time, and there's been so much discussion about, you know, what is the proper price per ERU, and there's been so many layovers. You no more than got the price set for, say, a single-family home at $19 per ERU. Now you're looking at purchasing a rather sizable piece of property. Was that cost figured into the $19 per ERU, or are you going to have to come back next year and say, guess what? That $19 per ERU is now going to go up to $20 per ERU or $30 because this was something that was done kind of after the stormwater utility rates were set.
The answer to the question about the rate being set, you know, first, the council, as part of the budget process, will review the stormwater utility projects, you know, that are proposed for 2004, and also look at what our debt and debt service costs are, and we'll set a new rate. I mean, I think, I mean, what we've got now is simply covering, you know, this year and what we had budgeted for this year, because we had actually gone on the assumption that the stormwater utility would be in place on July 1st, and that there would be some of our costs this year covered by charges this year. But you know, we will really look at it from the ground up again for 2004, and you know, we'll be deciding what projects we're going to finance with that. So I don't think that you want to look at this as something that by itself is triggering a change. Obviously, if we do it, you know, it'll be one component of setting a new rate. But everybody needs to know that setting that rate will be one of the tasks of the council this fall. You know, to your question specifically, Melanie, you know, was it driven by anything there? I don't think so. I think part of it is simply that our interest rates are still really low, that we're able to borrow money from some of the state funds, and you know, it simply looked like a very good opportunity to keep our financing costs really down.
I just thought that with so much discussion going on for so many weeks, and then it seemed in a very short period of time after the stormwater utility had kind of set its rate, that all of a sudden you're going into executive session to discuss the potential purchase of a piece of land that now you're going to put a retention basin on. And of course I didn't know that at the time. But I think it would have been helpful to maybe have that information prior going into setting the rates, that maybe you could have had a little jump on that. I think it's not going to be well received, just from somebody who's worked on enough budgets with you, that you just set this rate, you're getting people used to the idea of having another charge, another fee, that they can't take off their taxes, but this is actually, in my opinion, the fairest way to do it. But you just get them used to this $19 fee structure, and you're going to have to come out of the chute and raise it.
Well, that, in fact, was one of the items of discussion in the council, and I think that there was certainly sentiment about setting a rate that would be the rate for next year, to certainly the city manager would have preferred to have a, a stable rate rather than to have to deal
And
with,
have to keep coming back.
with two of them. And, and conceivably, we might end up at the same rate. I don't know. Yeah, you're right. It places a heavier burden on in terms of informing people about what this is all about and what it's going to cost. On the other hand, I think there were a majority who felt that we just needed to review. Well, I think that, the fundamental idea was that we don't want to collect more money than we have to spend for the projects. And so, in essence, the fee should be driven by the projects that you decide to do for that year. And if it's lower, then we'll adjust the rate downward there. The other thing is that we do have a credit policy. If you can show that you've taken action that cuts back on the amount of stormwater that's going into the city collectors, you can get some credit on your fee. And we fully expect that there will be people getting credit. We just don't know at this particular time how much credit is actually going to be given. So to some extent we need, I suppose, 6 months or at least a couple of months to
Kind of work out a system.
See what the shakeout is
yeah.
there. Yeah.
Well, and speaking of that, and Cheryl, I'll just, because I know you want to move on to other issues,
Right.
but with regard to the credits associated with stormwater, you are talking about, is it a resolution or an ordinance that you're going to bring forward that to develop a citizen committee that would actually review any credits, appeals, things like that, that would actually supersede council. Actually, you would bypass the council. It would be a separate committee. They would be kind of quasi-judicial, I guess, is really how you would identify them.
Yes, I would. Yeah, essentially the review process right now is that if somebody thinks they deserve a credit, they take the information to the Director of Public Works. And if all of the information qualifies, then the Director of Public Works says, yeah, they deserve the credit. If the Director of Public Works says no or not as much as you want, it then goes to the city manager, and he makes a determination. If the body wanting the credits doesn't like the city manager's answer, that property owner can go to the city council right now. Now, what I am proposing is that the last step be changed, and that what we do is establish a stormwater utility appeals board that really would function very much like the Board of Zoning Appeals or the Board of Review with regard to property tax assessments. And it would be quasi-judicial in the sense that that decision would be the final decision unless somebody wants to take it to circuit court there. And my reasoning there was simply that I think that an independent body that is specialized to deal with, in this case, utility credits, is a more appropriate body than the city council. And I don't see this as the council giving up a lot of authority or abrogating its responsibility, but the reality is that we're a legislative body primarily. I mean, occasionally we used to have to judge, whether we grant somebody's license or liquor license.
Or revoke.
Or revoke a license. I mean, I remember a taxi cab one. We got into a formal thing. And took a lot of time. I'm not absolutely sure the council is the best body to really do these kinds of things. So I look at it much more in terms of just being a better fit to have this appeals body there, like Board of Review or like
So
Board of Zoning
how do you
Appeals.
find people that specialize?
Well, that was going to be my
Yeah.
question. Will it be comprised of engineers and experts in this area? Because certainly,
Right.
I mean, as you know, I serve on some city boards and commissions. And
Right, you're on Board
I-
of Zoning Appeals, right? Yeah.
Well, that's
Or you
true,
have-
but
right, yeah.
but I don't, I don't know how comfortable I'd be on something like that, where I don't know anything about water retention or detention.
Right.
So what will their level of experience be?
Well, I think the first thing that we all need to know is that if this is passed, there would be 5 people on the appeals board. None of them is a slotted position. So, I mean, we're not representing business or homeowners or nonprofits or churches. You know, it's not a designated representative body. I'm looking, again, if it passes, for people who would have some expertise and would really be independent and would be respected in the community. For example, I would like very much to have a hydrologist or a geohydrologist on the board, and I've done some checking simply to find out about availability. Obviously, I think we need somebody who understands the nature of runoff and the nature of making calculations. And probably somebody maybe who has a legal background too there.
Don't we already have all that, Steve, on our city staff?
We do, and I'm absolutely sure that you know, our staff will be heavily involved. I mean, one of the questions that of course comes up is, you know, do we need all of this, or is this overkill? And I don't have an honest answer to that. I mean, my guess is that appeals that come in, a lot of them probably are going to be handled at the level of the Director of Public Works, or maybe they'll go to the city manager and get handled, and certainly our city manager would call upon the expertise of the staff to help out there. Maybe there are not even going to be complaints that will go all the way to an appeals board. But I think that this was sufficiently controversial, and there are varying levels of trust and distrust at this particular point, that it seemed to me that it's better to go the extra mile, and if in fact they have a pretty quiet time of it, great.
Well, and I think too that to use the city attorney in that capacity, I think that would be a conflict of interest almost.
Well,
I mean,
yeah.
you know, he works
Yeah.
for the city.
He does
I mean,
work for the city,
how
right, yeah.
unbiased could he really be? I mean, that's not a slap personally
No.
against Warren Craft. It's just the
Right.
reality of things. So I
Sure.
think that to have a separate legal counsel on a board like this would probably be a good idea.
The perception is important, and I think that you know, as you well know, I mean, we are always battling a variety of perceptions, and we probably just have to work pretty hard on it.
Sure.
So you don't feel as though the city council is dodging its responsibilities, because this
No.
is controversial, but I see a trend that has been alarming to me personally, that this council has abrogated its responsibility in a number of areas. And one of them was with the community development block grant money, and kind of handing those responsibilities off, which were also very controversial. I mean, they were all the not-for-profits who came forward looking for dollars to support their programs. So that got handed off to the Oshkosh Foundation and the United Way. Now you're going to develop this committee. I mean, when does the responsibility of the council in difficult situations, I mean, nobody likes to have to make these decisions. Nobody likes to revoke licenses. Nobody likes to have hearings for taxi cab people. But the bottom line is that you're the elected folks, and while it might take a lot of time and it's really uncomfortable, isn't that really what you signed on for?
I think we certainly have an obligation to, you know, take on difficult issues and deal with them. But I think in the 2 cases that you cited, we also have an obligation to bring the most effective and the most fair and equitable government to Oshkosh. And in the case of the block grant, I didn't have any particular trouble, you know, making the choices. mean, I didn't lose any sleep over that, but I always felt that we really didn't do a terribly good job of it, simply because what we had were lots of people coming to us with, you know, good proposals, or at least they sounded pretty good, and we didn't have the foggiest idea where they were shopping these other proposals, and whether they were doing a good job, what their other sources of money were. We were just kind of taking them at face value. So I didn't think we actually did a very good job doing that, and I felt that the process that has representation from, you know, the city, the United Way Community Foundation, the county, brought an awful lot more information to the table, and also brought a process of after-the-fact review. I mean, they went back and said, you know, did you really do these things? Did you accomplish these things? And that the end result was a better use of our money than we had you know, with the council there. Now what was the other example?
Well, and just basically the one that you're doing right now. I mean, I guess what my concern is that there are individuals, and I think citizens should be involved in things like parks boards and things like that. Don't get me wrong. But I think that we're putting the average Joe Blow and Jane citizen in an untenable situation. Here's some really controversial issues like community development block grant money and stormwater utilities, which get people very excited. It's about money, it's about, you know, am I going to be assessed, am I going to get the money? And then you put citizens who really have no control over the rules that were established, making decisions about whether, yes, you do get the credit, no, you don't get the credit, or yes, you do get the community development block grant money, or no, you don't. And there's nowhere, and I also think that it's important that with these groups coming forward, everything's televised now. It's a great way to educate the general public as to how the system works. A lot of this stuff is no longer televised. At community development block grant money, the foundation and the United Way, none of those discussions are televised. People don't know where those federal dollars are breaking out. They don't get to see the discussion and hear what people are saying. As when they came before the council, these people had to make a presentation. They had to sell their wares and to decide whether or not this was a good thing or a bad thing. And the general public was being educated right along with us. Now, if we didn't do a good job in getting enough information, then maybe we needed to fix the system or put things in place to get more information.
Well, I think you raise a good point about you know, public information, and you know, I'm always pushing public information, and maybe one of the things that we should do this fall is to be sure that all of the agency presentations are televised, and that
I think it's important
we
that
get them
people
out there.
know.
I mean, I think that's a great suggestion. I think we ought to do more with our capital improvements program. You know, to actually run the camera out and show people sites, and put that on television when we go. Let me just go back to the council issue. Let's take the stormwater utility. Okay, one, council decides whether we're going to have one. Two, it decides what the policy is going to be. Three, it decides what projects are going to be included in the stormwater management package and what the dollar amount is going to be. Four, it decides what the credit policy is. Five, it sets the rate. Now, the major elements of the stormwater utility are still very much in the hands of the council. Now, I'm not going to tell you who the quote came from, not important, but it's somebody who's a real expert, and the quote was, you know, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to make those calculations about stormwater runoff. Now, this came from somebody who, in fact, would be a rocket scientist relative to us, but that really, you know, the role of the appeals board, should it pass, is a far narrower and far more technical kind of thing. The bigger things are still very much in the hands of the council.
Well, and I think too, and then I want to move on to something else, because we've already exhausted like half an hour.
Well,
But I think that a panel of experts, as you're proposing, is probably even better qualified to make those kinds of decisions than a part-time council.
Well, I sure feel that way.
I
right,
mean,
yeah,
you know, you're
yeah.
a retired professor.
Yeah.
You know, we've got business people on the council, salespeople, retired teachers. Shirley Maddox is a retired school teacher.
Yeah.
You know, you guys don't have any expertise in
Right.
hydrology or geology either.
Well,
so
we're probably less likely to be independent of staff than you know, an expert body. I mean, what do we know, and where are we going to get that information?
yeah, so I
Yeah.
personally, I think the panel is a good idea.
We'll
Another,
agree to disagree.
we can debate this on another
Yeah, we'll
viewpoint.
Right,
get
yeah.
that down later.
The city, Steve, is facing another pretty controversial issue. And that is one proposed ordinance being brought forward by Deputy Mayor Mark Harris, and that is to ban smoking in Oshkosh restaurants. And we've done a couple shows on this already with Mark and also with a restaurant owner and his wife. Where do you stand on this issue as a councilman? Now, this will be coming up for its first reading on the 12th. We're taping this on August 7th. So less than a week away before the first reading, and you won't be making a decision until late August, probably?
Well, unless it is laid over, we would be looking at the 26th of August.
Well, obviously, a lot of restaurant owners are frightened by this. Maybe justifiably, maybe not, we don't know. We can only go by what has happened in other cities. In some cities, it's not affected restaurant owners. Other cities, it's affected them a lot. But have you given some thought to this? Where do you weigh in on this?
I think we've all given a lot of thought to it. And it really is a terribly complex issue because we've got essentially three competing values here. I mean, the first question is, should government be making these kinds of decisions at all? And certainly I've heard from a lot of people on both sides of that particular issue. The second one is, what about the economics, particularly of the smaller places? You know, are they going to be badly hurt by an ordinance of this kind? And then, of course, the final one is the public health one, the secondhand smoke issue there. Where am I at this particular point? I think the first thing that I would say is that although I've had you know, a lot of input from, I think, just about every possible argument that could be made on this, I do want to listen carefully on the 12th and then also on the 26th. And I've been trying to get around to talk to restaurant owners and tavern owners to get some sense of what their assessment is there. You know, all three of these things, I see merit in all three of them there. But I guess in the end, I think we really do have to deal with a secondhand smoke issue, less so for the patrons of various places and more so for the employees. I think one of the things that people are not thinking about very much is simply the legal liability that owners of places where there is smoking and secondhand smoke are going to have when the waiter or waitress 30 years from now files the suit saying, you know, I got lung cancer and it was because I had all the secondhand smoke. This is one reason why the major chains have gone smoke-free, and it's purely legal liability issues. And I'm not sure that that has been thought about it enough. To the specific ordinance, I guess I have some difficulties with it in that it is a little inconsistent, and you know, and I think Deputy Mayor Harris would recognize that too. I mean, on one hand, the restaurants are bearing a pretty big burden, and the taverns and bars where probably most of the smoking occurs are not included there. And if you're looking at it from a
Yet.
yeah,
Yet.
and you know, and I know that has been one of the arguments that, well, it's not politically possible now, but you know, down the road, you know, we'll take up this issue. I wouldn't be at all surprised when it, you know, comes to the floor if there isn't an amendment that basically just talks about either smoke-free or, you know, something that would apply to every place. You know, the likelihood of it passing is probably not terribly high, but at least I think it would be kind of a, I mean, if in fact you are looking at this from a public health perspective, maybe you just have to say, well, let's vote up or down on the whole thing from that perspective.
When do you start drawing the line in the sand for public health? Because there are a lot of people, and don't misunderstand me, as being a cigarette smoker, it's difficult to not be emotional about this because I've been both a smoker and a non-smoker, which is not a good thing because I bounce back and forth. And I certainly am not trying to encourage anyone to start smoking because God knows it's a nasty habit. But when you start putting this under the guise of public health and you're going to protect people from secondhand smoke, isn't there an element, Steve, as a well-educated, rational human being, that there are people who have choices? No one is forced to work in a place that they don't want to. If they feel as though that this is a health risk, they're not forced to work there. I mean, if there is, if mom and dad don't want to see Johnny working in a restaurant that has smoking, he can go and work at the McDonald's or the Burger King or in one of the chains. There is nothing that states that these people are forced as indentured servants, as Phil Levine had said, that they must work in these locales that could potentially put them at risk. Any more than a customer is forced to walk in the door and eat a steak and consume cigarette smoke at any given restaurant. There are choices. Why do we feel compelled to say that this is all about public health? Because as you and I know, there are people who have problems with breathing that are affected by perfume, by chemical sprays on lawns. I mean, are you now going to go after chem lawn because my neighbor sprays their lawn and I have an allergic reaction? And it's a public health issue. Not only that, it affects the stormwater runoff because those are chemicals that actually get into our system.
That's correct, and,
And
water
true.
quality is increasingly going to be an issue.
And again, that can fall within the public health and cost. I mean, where do we draw the line as to saying there are certain things that we have the right to choose in the United States of America, and there's things that we feel compelled to get involved in, and where does that line get drawn? I mean, I hate to say this because I know your good friend Kathy Propp is involved in this, but my God, some of these people need to find. I mean, there are so many things that we need to worry about. In this community, there are people with no health care whatsoever that can't take care of minimal needs. I mean, just going for checkups they can't afford prescription drugs to take care of their heart disease, probably caused by overeating steak, which I'm sure you're not going to take on the beef lobbyists. So
where do we draw the line here,
Where do we
Steve?
draw the line? Well, I mean, I think the first thing, as you have ably pointed out, there's nothing neat and tidy about this kind of an issue. You know, when you are talking about public health, and you are talking about individual choice and individual responsibility too. I mean, I think what can we say? I mean, we all make lifestyle choices about what we're going to do, and some make better choices than others.
I noticed you're looking right at me when you're saying that.
No, I was looking at me, and I thought about not making it to the Y this week. Right? Yeah. I mean, again, if I had my druthers, I believe very much in the market, and I like it as a mechanism, and I like the idea of choice. And certainly, I'm going to eat in places where there isn't secondhand smoke because I like those places. And so far, I've found enough nice places that satisfies my needs there. Other people are going to, and I will love it if restaurant owners and owners of other establishments would simply say, hey, this is probably ultimately good business for us or good practice, and we're just going to go smoke-free and not have government involved in it at all. I mean, that would be my dream if that were going to occur. But looking at the other side, if we want to call it the other side, one, we know there's an awful lot of evidence about health hazards with secondhand smoke. Secondly, we also know that we have public health regulation occurring in a lot of things. I mean, you could say, well, I don't have to go to that place that's got cockroaches there, or I don't have to go to the place that's got rats running around there, or where the refrigeration has been off for a good period of time.
Well, if they let me know that there was rats, then it would.
Then it would be okay.
But
all
see,
right,
they're not letting you know that there's rats.
Okay.
This is. I mean,
Right.
when you go to smoking and non-smoking, I mean, it's well posted on the door: no smoking,
Right.
please, or smoking allowed. I mean,
Yeah.
this is not a hidden agenda kind of thing. I mean,
Correct.
whereas rats and roaches are probably not something that they're going to put on the door.
You have
Roaches available,
You
rats running
You
freely.
haven't seen the
Yeah.
we have E. coli here.
Yeah, no, we don't wash after going to the bathroom signs. Yeah,
yeah.
Well,
It's not. You're right. It's not crisp. It's not clean. And,
I just think it's scary that I sound
yeah.
more like a Democrat than you do.
How can this be?
I
Right?
don't know if I'm having an identity crisis or what's going on here.
It's the water.
Yeah.
No, it's not the water.
Not the
I don't know
water,
what it is,
yeah.
but at the last council meeting in July, there were some problems with a few of the regular citizens who get up and speak at a lot of the meetings. Problems such as refusing to stop when their 5 minutes was up, making very rude comments to the council, you in particular, swearing at you all. Certainly, it was behavior that I think these people should be ashamed of themselves for doing. And ironically, the very next day in New York City, one of the council members was shot to death, during a daytime council meeting. Now,
Got out just in the nick of time.
is something like that is something like that going to happen in Oshkosh? Probably not. But nonetheless, I think that these people need to start behaving a little bit more adult-like and professionally. I mean, this is, after all, a business meeting. Your comments were very stern, and you threatened to actually consider pulling citizen statements altogether. Do you think that, and while I don't approve of their behavior and their comments at all, do you think that it's fair, though, to threaten to pull citizen statements and something that affects the entire citizenry because of the actions of a few?
I really think that citizen statements are important in our meetings, and I think it's unlikely that the council or unlikely that I would ever do away with it. A couple of things. As you well know, council members get information from a lot of sources. We get phone calls, letters, people on the street. One of the things about being a member of a council is that you never quite relax because you're always looking around to seeing if there's a problem or somebody wants to talk to you about it. And that's a good thing. I mean, I think that's a responsibility there. But when we come down to the meeting, the primary task of that meeting is to conduct the business of the city. And we've had a very liberal policy with regard to citizen statements, and I think the city ought to be proud of that policy. But I think we need to recognize that if people really want to convey information to us and opinions to us, that there are a lot of avenues to do it. You know, it doesn't have to be simply at the council meeting there. I think, again, that I would hope that we can maintain, you know, some sense of decorum. I hope that people who speak do so because they, you know, have a positive suggestion to make. The particular issue really was a case of what were likely to be some pretty negative comments about a staff member who was not there, and frankly that just is not an appropriate forum to, I think, express those views. I mean, if you really want to contact the council or contact the manager about complaints with the staff, that's fine, that's okay. We're going to have a lot of people at the meeting on the 12th for the smoking issue. I just, you know, again, and we'll take as much time as we need to have there, but I'm going to make it very clear that, you know, cheering, applauding, booing is not appropriate for it. We're there to listen to what people have to say. And
See, I don't even think that clapping should be allowed.
well, I think I've probably been a little too lenient at times, and I would agree with you there that we'll just take the statements as they come. It's not a rally.
You know,
it's a meeting,
exactly,
right,
and
yeah.
all the clapping takes up time.
It does take up time, right?
When
yeah.
you're clapping after every comment that's positive
Yeah.
for your position, you know,
Right.
and you've got a lot of people, that does take up time.
Yeah. But don't worry. I mean, I may have said that in the modest heat of the discussion there.
You didn't break a sweat, though. I mean, you know, for somebody, if that was your show of, like, anger,
It was,
wasn't
it
like
was.
you didn't have, like, a hissy fit
It
or
was
anything.
passion that you saw there.
was very
right,
It's
yeah.
very controlled passion, but I wanted to take you to task on something,
Yeah.
because I've been to council meetings since I've left the
Sure,
council.
right, yeah.
And I think Mark Harris was actually sitting in as the deputy
Might have
mayor
been, yeah.
in your absence.
Yeah,
And one of the things I have to tell you, and you know I can yammer, and
Mm-hmm.
5 minutes, even when I'm trying to collect my thoughts, you know, I don't know if it's ADD or what's going on sometimes, but things pop into your head, and you're even as exposed to cameras and the time element and knowing all of you and working with you, believe it or not, you still get very nervous. And one of the things that I really did not care for is the little sign that says 1 minute, and then very quickly somebody goes over here and it says stop.
Right.
I thought it was very silly, and it was
How
kind
would-
of demeaning. It was just like, if my
Would
5
you like
minutes are...
would you like a clock? 'Cause
No,
that's
I
a-
would just like
that's
you,
a-
as a gentleman to a lady, to say, Melanie,
Shut up.
5 minutes... Yeah.
Right, yeah.
No, Melanie, 5 minutes have passed. Have you finished your thoughts? If not, we can give you another minute. You know, I'm a human being, you're a human being. You show me respect, I show you respect. I would probably be slightly embarrassed that it took me longer than 5 minutes to convey my thoughts. But I would be respectful of the fact that you said, you know, your 5 minutes are up, and, you know, do you need another minute to just finish? But the little
Sure.
signs, I
Well,
don't know, I feel like I'm at a forum waiting to answer those snappy
The
questions.
candidates
Right.
forum.
Well, you know, actually, I'm glad you said that, because I really haven't gotten comment one way or the other on them. I mean, certainly the intention was to try to, you know, provide some, you know, quiet guidance to the speaker there. But, you know, if in fact they are irritating and demeaning,
I found them to be, because I'm
yeah,
trying to make eye contact to
Uh-huh.
see if I'm, you know, you read body language, you're trying to make eye contact to know that, you know, everybody's like actually actively listening and not doing one of these nodding off things on you. And while I'm making eye contact, I can see hands moving over here that says stop, and you're thinking, okay, so really, you haven't heard a word that I've said because you're more interested in making sure that your paper sign is held up on time. And I guess my point is, Steve,
Sure.
is you and I both know that not that many people are showing up at the council meetings to express views, pro or con, these days. And you and I are both big ones that have always wanted citizens' input. What's the big deal if they go a minute or two over? I mean, okay, so 5 minutes, clean up your thoughts, give them another minute. It's not like you're going to be there for another hour. You know, I mean, you can kindly give them the gentle nudge without, you know, and I think that's where the frustration is coming, is they don't feel like, are you actively listening or are you just kind of going through the motions? And I know sometimes it's difficult because you hear, unfortunately, sometimes the same complaints over and over. But
Well, maybe we'll try that. We'll
Hey.
we'll see if
active change,
right,
Bloechl 101.
yeah, and you know, see if that works better. We can
Well, I
cer-
appreciate
we can
that.
certainly try that.
Thank
yeah.
you.
I along the lines of the 5-minute rule, I did have one other thing that it's more of a question, I guess, than anything else. You know, as a reporter, I've covered council meetings and town board meetings in a lot of different places, and I will say you are very right in that Oshkosh is much more liberal than a great many communities are. Some have that 5-minute rule, and by God, they don't defer from it. The city clerk sits there with a stopwatch, and when the time is up, you
Really?
sit
Yeah.
down whether you're done or not. And I like our system better. It's more
Good.
citizen friendly. But my question is really about public hearings. I know that Oshkosh sticks to the 5-minute rule with public hearings too. Other communities don't, and one in particular is the city of Neenah, where they adhere very strictly to the 5-minute rule during citizen statements, but during public hearings, you are not bound by that time limitation. And what some of the folks in city government there have told me is that because public hearings are state statute mandated,
Correct. Yeah.
they don't feel that they can impose a 5-minute rule. Have you, in your business dealings with other communities, heard anything like that, or do you know anything about it?
I really haven't, in terms of the time. Obviously, they are mandated by state statute for certain kinds of activities. But I'll be honest, I really, you know, I haven't heard. I would say I should check with Neenah and see what.
Because I always
see what
found
they're
that
up to
very
up there,
interesting,
yeah.
because since they adhere so strictly to the 5-minute rule
Right,
for the
yeah.
other things, I would think that if they could with anything and everything that they would, but the public hearings, I mean,
Yeah.
I've heard them banter back and forth with the same individual for 15 minutes.
Well, as you know, we certainly have exceptions. I mean, sometimes it's a formal exception where you ask permission of the council to
For
let somebody
presentations.
continue on. But then the other thing is if there is discussion started, in a sense, the clock is lost at that point
Right,
anyway.
right.
You just try to hope that your fellow council members
Rein it in.
stay in reasonable bounds.
And
there,
actually,
right, yeah.
sometimes, I know as a
Yeah.
council member, I was one of the worst offenders. I
Yeah.
mean, I couldn't, it's hard to expect
Yeah.
citizens to stay within 5 minutes when you had a council member like me who could yammer for 10.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well,
it was very, I mean, it
you know-
seemed rather hypocritical to me that I could talk ad nauseum.
But I think that council members, again, since this is in the conduct of public business, ought to have more latitude in terms of how long they speak and also how often they speak. And so, you know, I know that periodically the idea of putting the same limit on council members as the citizens has been brought up. I don't adhere to that, because I mean, I think you're elected to do something, and you should be able to take longer and talk
And
more
we can
often,
irritate
right, yeah.
people just as equally as
Well,
as
sure,
vice
right,
versa.
yeah.
Well, with the, how much time do we have left? Are we okay?
Well, actually, we're getting close to about 5 minutes, I
Okay.
believe.
Yeah.
So,
Well, listen, I will just, and this is terrible to do to you in 5 minutes, but seems we like to adhere to a 5-minute rule. State budgets
Oh, yes,
and city council budgets right around the corner.
Yeah.
what kind of effect is the state budget going to have on the city of Oshkosh? And do you see the kind of effects that the governor's veto for the property tax freeze could potentially have? Do you feel that that's good, bad? And if it's upheld, is that good or bad? And real quickly, what has Representative Greg Underheim's support of slashing the shared revenue done to the city of Oshkosh? And you have 5 minutes. Go.
Hey, great.
You don't even have that long anymore.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, first, if the veto is sustained, the city will have about $1.3 million less in state shared revenues. This is under the governor's budget there.
Is that million or billion, did you say? Million, correct?
Million.
Correct, yeah.
We never had billion anyway.
We would lose about 10% of our state shared revenues. And it'll be tight, there's no question about it. We'll have to make some cuts, but you know, I think we can live with it. If the veto is overturned, things will really
Get
be
bad.
awful, because the limitation is on the levy, the actual dollar amount raised, rather than on the rate. And this could actually end up meaning that our tax rate will go down. Some people would save lots of money, others are not going to. It's a terrible thing. It can affect our TIFs. It's the worst possible thing. Now, our legislators both supported the levy freeze.
And that's Cheryl and Greg.
And Greg, and we have had, the city, I personally have had conversations with both of them and expressed our deep concern over a levy freeze and said, if you have to do it, look at the rate. And I'm afraid that...
And they've both supported the slash to shared revenue as well,
that is-
Cheryl and Greg. So besides slashing our shared revenue by 10%, they've also supported a levy freeze, which could decimate this community to levels that I don't think people can possibly comprehend. I don't think people comprehend this, because there's actually a movement to try to overturn the governor's veto by citizens, because they're thinking they're going to save money on their property taxes.
We're going to work very, very, assuming that the veto is not overturned. You know, there's been all of the talk about property taxes going up, you know, anywhere from 5.9 to 9.5, depending upon which study we're looking at. In Oshkosh, we're going to work really hard to, you know, try to keep the rate down. I'm going to say my informal goal right now, and I don't want to be, you know, absolutely tied into it simply because we haven't seen the numbers yet. But I would be very happy if we could simply maintain our tax rate at the same level that we had it last year.
Maybe holding some public forums to explain to people what this freeze could potentially mean, much like what we did when the shared revenue with Dick and Jane and Jane Vandehay and Dick Woolink and a lot of the people when we were talking about the elimination of shared revenue. It was an extremely informative process, and it helped people put their arms around shared revenue. And I think that if we could do more of that and talk about levy versus rate and the freezes, people could then look at their state legislators and say, are you out of your mind? Because they don't understand. And quite frankly, I can't believe that we have state legislators that can possibly comprehend what this means and still support it. I cannot believe that they would be that irresponsible to literally leave us in a situation that will cost us jobs and what it could do to this community, the very core, the very essence of what they're supposed to represent. It's shameful.
We only have about a minute and a half left, Mayor. Obviously, your term comes up for renewal, if you will, in April. It expires in April, and If you're going to run again, you need to declare candidacy in December, I believe. Have you given some thought to that?